Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for Leading with Heart, the Power of Compassionate Leadership. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Since we're virtual, please excuse issues that may pop up. If you have problems with your video or audio, click Reconnect to get back to the webinar right away. A quick question to give us a better understanding of our audience makeup. So we want to know, which leadership role best describes your current position? Are you a team leader, project manager, department head, senior executive, or maybe it's a business owner? If it's none of the above, go ahead and drop those in the chat. We'll watch the chat and the poll as we move forward. I'm going to go ahead and keep the question up for a few moments so you can submit the response that best reflects you. For our live audience, we are recording today's webinar. You're going to be able to access it online after it's uploaded onto our website. When it is ready, you'll get an email with that link. We're excited to have Dr. Alan Gorman back with us today, an Associate Professor of Management at UAB. He's also Chair of the Department of Management, Information Systems, and Quantitative Methods in the Collette School of Business. He earned his BA from the University of Georgia, MA from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and PhD from the University of Tennessee. This is the fourth webinar he has joined us for. In 2023, he was here for Adulting 101, from the classroom to the boardroom. He returned last year for Workplace Toxic Avengers Unite, how to recognize toxicity in the workplace and what to do about it. And just last month, he joined us for Networking Without Borders, Building Your Network in a Remote World. You can check out all of these webinars by visiting alumni.uab.edu/videos. Now for the result of that earlier poll. Looking at it, and if you're looking at just the ones that we pushed out, 16% team lead, 9% senior exec, 7% business owner. Majority of the individuals, Dr. Gorman, are none of the above, and includes a district nurse, senior faculty, and even recently retired plant manager. But before I turn things over to Dr. Gorman, another quick poll. I'm going to go ahead and end that, and we will reset, and we'll get that next one up and online. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you in your ability to lead with compassion? Today's topic, with 1 being least confident and 5 being most confident. I'm going to go ahead and leave this poll up for a bit as we officially welcome Dr. Gorman back. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us once again.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it, and I always enjoy being a part of these, so thank you for welcoming me back. I want to talk to you today about something I'm pretty passionate about in all of my leadership roles. I've tried as best I could to adopt this kind of philosophy, and I want to make clear as I go into this, I want to make it very clear, this is not easy to do, to lead with compassion and do it consistently in all situations. So what I'm going to tell you is, it sounds great on paper. It's not easy to do, but the good news is we can get better at it. And I'm going to tell you how throughout this. So first thing I want you to do is take a look at this meme that you may have seen floating around the internet. There's an employee out there who still thinks of you because you are kind to them. Never stop being that leader. When I teach leadership classes, one of the first things I will do is I will say, think of all the bad managers you've ever had. And people can easily remember all of the things that made their managers bad, poor bosses. Then I'll say, tell me about the good managers you've had, the good bosses. And they'll list all the different traits and characteristics of people who've been good bosses. And then I'll say, how many of you think you'll be a good boss? And of course, everybody raises their hand. And then I say, well, how many of you think you'll be a bad boss? And of course, nobody raises their hand. But yet, why do we have so many bad bosses in our society? Why do we have so many toxic leaders, which I talked a lot about on the last webinar on toxic workplaces? But the thing I want you to keep in mind is all of you have probably had a really great boss or a really great leader. And when you're leading other people, think about, how do you want to be remembered by other people? My guess is we want to be remembered not as dictators and not as taskmasters, but just basically good people who did good things and made good decisions and cared about people. So how do we do that? So first of all, I want to just go through a little bit of housekeeping here, because you probably see all kinds of stuff that talks about compassion, empathy, kindness. What's the difference? Well, for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about, we're talking about three legs of the same stool, right? We know that there's overlap across all these different ideas, all these different concepts. For the purposes of this, I'm going to insert compassion where certain articles may have talked about empathy or kindness, but in general, there's an underlying what I would call a G factor underlying all that. In other words, if you're high on one, you're likely to be high on the other. I'm not talking about, and I think this is a key point. I'm not talking about just being nice, right? If you're nice to people, if you hold the door for people, but then you go around and talk behind their back, that's not compassion. That's being nice to people's faces. And we probably all know people who do that. I'm not talking about toxic positivity either. Toxic positivity is when, everything's great and wonderful, puppy dogs and rainbows, even though the sky is falling. We're still positive about everything that's going on. Being compassionate is recognizing the world in which we live, recognizing the barriers, recognizing all the things that are happening and appreciating that, but still leading with a sense of things can get better through compassion, empathy, and kindness. And another thing that people often misconstrue about this, I'm not talking about not holding people accountable. There's actually nothing more compassionate than holding other people accountable. And, for example, having to fire someone or having to get rid of someone who's just not performing, that's not fitting in. One of the best things you can do is help them realize this organization is not for them. And there might be greener pastures, other opportunities that may be more accessible to them and their skill sets. That's compassion, right? It's something that you don't want to do. We don't have to fire people. We don't want to have to, do anything that would have a negative consequence. But if doing those things, and actually the research showed this, is that most of the time people end up in better positions with better fits with their skill sets, and they end up telling people, the previous employer, thank you for recognizing this and helping me make a transition that at the end of the day is a lot better for me. My definition that I'm going to use throughout this really is just this: showing genuine care and concern for other human beings. That's compassion. And so that's what I'm going to focus on in the rest of this talk. Just to make a big picture case for compassion, hopefully I don't have to do that with this audience. I mean, the fact is, look, we're struggling, right? We are in a really, really crazy time in our history. We've experienced things that we've never experienced in many generations. We just went through, about 5 years ago, one of the weirdest things that I thought we would never experience through the pandemic. But, the fact is, here we are. Our success rate is still 1,000. We're here and we're still battling and we're still trying to be good people. But there's just so many things going on. We know from the research we're more divided politically than we've ever been. We know political polarization is at an all-time high. We know that the middle class is shrinking. Our dollars are not going as far as they used to. Groceries, the price of groceries is outrageous. Living through the pandemic, where we had all kinds of massive changes on society and the family structure, there has been a lot that we've been hit with, and we recognize and we appreciate that. That alone tells us, we all need compassion, right? We all need to feel a sense that other people care about us, that other people have a sense of compassion for us and each other. we definitely need it in the workplace, right? We know U.S. employees feel burned out at work. They feel emotionally drained at work. By the end of the workday, you just feel completely used up. We know we see this. I'm sure a lot of people on the call are maybe UAB employees or healthcare employees. If you're in a field like healthcare where you are providing services to others and you are a direct care employee where you're dealing with people, it's easy to get burned out very, very quickly. And we see that. We see that in the research. We see that in surveys. Burnout is at an all-time high. We know 77% of employees say stress has negatively impacted their physical health, stress that they encounter in the workplace. And then we went through all these drastic changes that impacted our life coming out of COVID. And now we're seeing kind of the back end of that. We're seeing all these repercussions where we had a lot of flexibility coming out of COVID, but now a lot of organizational leaders are pulling back on that with return to office mandates and general lack of connection that we're seeing. We lost a lot of those social connections as a result of the pandemic, and we're struggling to maintain those or bring those back. But here's the business case for compassion and at work. And one of the things that it's kind of personally irritating to hear about, here's the business case for X, Y, or Z, because at the end of the day, this is the right thing to do, right? Showing compassion and being compassionate, it's the right thing to do, right? But you still, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of people that I know are probably skeptical, but there's a lot of great research to show that being compassionate, leading with compassion is meaningful in the workplace. We know it's linked to employee retention. Almost everybody, 94% of people want to belong to a place that they feel where they do belong at their job. A recent survey found that half of employees who left their jobs in the past 6 months said that they did not feel valued by their organization. They did not feel a sense of belonging. We know compassion is linked to productivity and innovation. A classic study that we reference a lot over here in the business school is Google's Project Aristotle, where they looked at work teams over 37,000 employees. And surprisingly to them, they found that this idea of psychological safety, which I'll reference again later, really was the key factor that distinguished the most successful teams from all the other teams that they studied. And we know it's important for culture. If you're trying to build a culture, building a culture of compassion is one of the best ways to strengthen that culture. We know employees are 5 times more likely to want to stay at a place long-term where they believe their managers are honest, ethical, kind, and they're 11 times more likely to think their workplace is great. So there is a business case for creating a culture of compassion and leading with compassion. And the other thing is, we want compassion, right? Go back to what I first said. When we think about the best bosses we've had, I would imagine most of them are probably people that you would classify as compassionate, kind, empathetic. Employees who feel their company genuinely care about them are way less likely to want to leave. They had lower turnover intentions. We know companies with strong cultures of trust see about 74% lower stress levels and 50% higher productivity. Another interesting thing is, and I'm seeing this in my classes as well, younger workers are coming out on the job market and they expect genuine care and empathy. They want to know that people care about them in the workplace and at their companies. And that's explicitly what they're looking for. There's a really great HBR article that looked at this not too long ago. Younger workers are really focused on this these days. And the other thing to keep in mind, and this is from another HBR article that just came out not too long ago, is we want to feel understood in the workplace, and we want our leaders to understand us as well. Well, we need leaders to understand us so they know how to support us, right? How do we understand, for example, if something bad happens to you that has implications for you at your job, how are people going to know how to respond to that unless they know your situation? As leaders, what we should be doing, is understanding those situations and how we can be compassionate in providing care and support. We know from this is I'm a junkie for anything leadership related. Gallup just put out their latest leadership data, and many years ago they came up with the 4 needs of followers way back in 2005, and they found again compassion consistently year after year after year is one of the 4 basic needs of followers. So what do we look for in our leaders? We want leaders who provide hope. We want leaders who we can trust. We want leaders who are compassionate, who care about us and listen to us. And we want stability. We want to feel like we can contribute in a stable environment, including that idea of psychological safety. We want to feel like we're trusted, and that whatever happens, the leader has our back, and we're confident in that stability. Another piece of recent data that points to this same thing, DDI, which is a popular consulting firm, Development Dimensions International. They had their own leadership outlook for 2025. Again, look at what's going on here in the latest. We want leaders who can strategically build trust by providing these different behaviors, including listening, responding with genuine empathy, right? That's exactly what we want from our leaders. So why lead with compassion? Well, I'm going to say something that may or may not be controversial, probably not in this audience, but I honestly believe as a leader, you have a moral and ethical imperative to genuinely care about those you lead. And the reason I say this is the following reasons. I talked about toxic workplaces and toxic leadership last year, and I presented these data, and this is just a little bit of data, but there's tons of data that show that toxic leaders, bad leaders, are bad for our health, right? They lead to illnesses. The stress that they create leads to illness. We've seen increases in heart attacks, angina, and deaths from heart disease, more heart attacks. Bad leadership kills, right? And so when you think of it from that perspective, we have a lot of power in our hands as leaders that we don't appreciate and understand. We have a great responsibility to the people that we lead. And I think about it in terms of, I've often talked in the past about, we need a Hippocratic oath for leadership, right? Do no harm. The best thing we can do as leaders is just don't do harm to the people that we're leading. And I honestly believe that if we are in a leadership role, we have a moral and ethical imperative to really care about the people that we're leading. And I don't know the right way to convey that, but I feel that a lot of leadership development programs and a lot of what we see in terms of leadership development, they teach you some of the basic frameworks of leadership and leading tasks and leading people. But one of the most important things, I think, is you are in charge of these people, and you play a huge role in their daily well-being, in their well-being that they take with them back home, and then vice versa. I think we need to be leading with compassion. I think that's a basic fundamental thing that we should be doing as leaders, and we need to be teaching people how to do that. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. So, okay, Dr. Gorman, you made the case. How can I lead compassionately? Well, first of all, we know it sounds good in theory, but how do we do that? And there's research that shows 91% of leaders say that compassion is important. I think most of the people on this call would agree with that. But then 80% of those same people would like to enhance their compassion, but then they don't really know how. So I'm going to cover some ways to do that. But one of the things I want to make clear is I'm not talking about fake compassion, and I'm not talking about slogans and buzzwords and mission statements and we care about our people. You probably have heard of companies, people are our greatest asset. You can imagine all the different sayings out there about why our people are great and we care about our people. But then we look at the decisions that get made and you often question, okay, do you really care about people? And a lot of people, 52% in a recent survey said they found their company's efforts to be empathetic towards employees as completely dishonest. And again, it's not buzzwords and slogans, it's in the actions that you make on a daily basis as leaders in the organization. The good news is compassion is a skill that can be developed through deliberate practice. We're going to talk about some ways to do that. This comes from a great book by a guy named Jamil Zaki that I'm going to reference again. In 2019, he published a great book about the power of compassion. He called it The War for Kindness. Tons of great data, tons of great information that I'm going to reference in a little bit. But the important point I want you to come away with is it's not about buzzwords and slogans and corporate mission statements. It's real compassion is genuine and authentic. You feel it. You can feel it when you walk into the building. You can feel it when you walk into the office. You can feel it when you step into the building. I belong at this place. People care about me. And this is a place where I want to show up on a daily basis and give my best because of that, right? That's real and that's authentic. It's not in a piece of paper. A few real basic ways we can do that. We're going to take a deeper dive in a little bit. Actively listening and being curious to what people are saying when you're talking to other people as leaders, knowing you don't have to have all the answers. One of the best things that when I'm doing leadership development, one of the easiest things and one of the best things is if you don't know the answer, just say so, right? But a lot of younger leaders, a lot of developing leaders feel like they have to have all the answers. And when you lead with that kind of approach, people pick up on that and they often feel like you're trying to make up or you don't really know the answer, but you're just grasping at straws. One of the most authentic things we can do is if you don't know the answer, just say, but then follow up and say, well, I don't know the answer right now, but I'm going to follow up with you and I'll get back as soon as I can, right? Being authentic and genuine about not having an answer is completely fine. And that's honestly what we should be doing as leaders. Kind of related, avoiding autopilot responses when you're talking to people, generic, how are you doing today? Fine. How are you? Right? How's the kids? Right? People pick up on that inauthenticity and that autopilot response that we have. Why not mix it up a little bit and have a genuine conversation, asking genuine questions, and then actively listening and being curious in those questions when we're having those conversations. And then just again, that seems kind of intuitive, making the time to listen, making the time to talk to people, providing space and opportunity for people to share the things that they have to say. One of the worst things I see companies do is say, we want your opinion. Here's this survey. Take the time to fill it out. But then there's absolutely zero follow-up, right? Or, you can't probably institute every single suggestion, but there probably can be some tweaks or some things that can be changed based upon what's going on. But one of the worst things I see companies do all the time, they gather all this data, all these opinions, and they do absolutely nothing with it, right? What kind of message are you sending? You're sending a very clear message. We really don't care about your opinion. We'll ask you, but we're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to synthesize it and put that info back out for everybody to see what everybody's opinions are. Making the time to listen, genuinely reflecting, and having authentic, genuine responses, I think is one of the basics of compassionate leadership. 6 additional ways that come from a great article in HR Executive. Embracing vulnerability. A lot of you on this call may have heard of Brene Brown and her work. Opening up to people is one of the fastest, best ways that we can connect with our team. I teach this a lot in my leadership development classes, and I'll do it in my own classes as well. I'll present first day of class. Here's all the times I've screwed up. Here's all the times I've had leadership failures. And a lot of people in important leadership positions would say, oh my gosh, you can't have any, chink in the armor or air of vulnerability. But by breaking down those barriers, we connect with people on an emotional level and a human level really quickly. And you can break down a lot of those barriers so fast by just being vulnerable about acknowledging struggles, acknowledging challenge, acknowledging your emotions, embracing that level of vulnerability. And then leading with genuine care and compassion, making it a priority to understand what's happening with your team, checking in regularly. During the pandemic, I was on a call with a local chamber of commerce, and they were asking, what can we do as leaders? One of the best things we can do is just check in with people. The best companies during the pandemic, they would regularly reach out and check in with their team. How are you doing? How are things going? What I've seen, however, is that a lot of that kind of fell off. When we got back to the workplace, everything is relatively normal again. We kind of fell out of that, right? And I kind of see that these days is the idea that, okay, I see you every day, so the need to check in with you isn't as important as it may have been. I think that's incredibly important. And I always talk about, when I teach leadership, when you have a meeting with a subordinate, a team member, first thing is just providing space for some of that basic chit chat, right? And resisting the temptation to go right into business. And we have this temptation as leaders because we're busy. I get it. Everybody has time commitments and they're behind on everything. But just providing that space to have some basic conversation with people at the beginning of a meeting or out in the hallway, those things are incredibly important and show genuine care and concern. I've talked a lot about authenticity. When I say authenticity, it's just being genuine and transparent and acting with integrity, right? And so one of the things I do with my in my leadership development classes is we spend a lot of time in the very beginning coming up with our own vision for who we are and who we want to be. And those are based upon our goals, our values, our interests, and our backgrounds. And one of the best things I think you can do as a leader is when you step into that leadership situation with your team, one of the best things you can do is to immediately say, look, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. And this is what I'm going to expect from you all in return for me providing your leadership, right? And I think that comes down to, here's what I value. I value openness, trust, communication, transparency, and I'm going to expect the same from you. And I often find that in poorly performing teams is they've never established any of those relationships. They've never established any of those basics. Why not go ahead and make it clear, this is who I am as a leader. This is who I'm going to be for you. These are going to be my expectations, right? Being genuine, transparent about who you are as a leader can really go a long way in your long-term success with your team. Increasing visibility, I'm not saying be seen out of your office, but, showing up to different work events, being there when your team is there or other employees are there, checking on other people in the office. We used to call it years ago, management by walking around, which is an incredibly simple technique, but yet a lot of managers don't even do that. They sit in their office all day long and they wait for other people to come and talk to them. One of the easiest things we can do is just get out and be seen and check on people and have genuine, honest conversations with people. So being present, being engaged, not being on your phone, checking your email, which is, I know we all struggle with, and then being approachable, being the one to initiate conversation. If you haven't seen somebody in a long time, how are things going since the last time we talked? I always try to tell leaders to have a few set of canned questions in your back pocket. Like, okay, here's some things I'm going to ask some people. Like, what are you most proud of, in the last few months? What has made you most proud as a team member? So initiating those conversations, recognizing those accomplishments. I used to do, when I was a department chair, I used to call it sunshine. Here's some recent achievements from our team. So and so got a publication. Here's some sunshine for the rest of the team. It's just an opportunity for us to celebrate each other's accomplishments, and it doesn't have to be a big to do or a giant party or whatever, but just a simple recognition, recognizing people, their accomplishments and their milestones. I can guarantee you goes a long way with your team. How do we continue to build that culture of compassion? Again, I talked about it when I talked about toxic workplaces. It starts at the top, right? It starts at the very top. What is the tone you are setting as a leader, as a top leader in the organization? They should be sending a clear message to the rest of the organization. This is how we're going to lead in this organization. And so it always comes down to me. It always comes down to leadership. It starts by leading by example at the top. So role modeling that compassion, I think, is incredibly important. I talked about this when I talked about toxicity. If you don't want toxicity in your organization, well, then don't engage in toxic behavior, right? If you want compassion in your organization, well, engage in compassionate behavior. Role model those behaviors that other people can see, particularly if you're in a leadership position. I stress this a lot with my students. When you are in a leadership role, you are under the microscope. People are watching your every move, whether you think they are or not. They are taking their cues from you. So how do you want them to take their cues? Do you want them to take the cue of you get upset and fly off the handle if things don't go your way? Or do you want them to take your cue of showing compassion when it's feasible? Embedding that psychological safety that I talked about, incorporating compassion into our business strategy. What do I mean by that? Well, performance management. How do we manage performance and expectation? Is compassion embedded in that? Is it embedded in who we select in our organization? Are we looking for people who are compassionate and empathetic? Making compassion a hiring and promotion factor. I'm going to come back to this point because I think it's incredibly important in a second. And then using compassion to strengthen our client and stakeholder relationships. Who do we do business with? Who are the vendors that we use? Do they have a culture of compassion in their organization? Because we want to be associated with people who share the same values and goals that we do. I think it's incredibly important that we flock together with people that we want to have a relationship, right? And so if we want to be seen as compassionate, then associate with other compassionate people and make it clear that that's a part of your identity. What else can I do to lead compassionately? This comes from a great, Justin Wright does a lot of infographics. If you follow stuff on the internet and LinkedIn in particular, simple things we can do. How can I support you? Instead of jumping to, why haven't you got this done? Instead of jumping to that, asking, okay, how can I support you to get this done? Or is there something I can do to help? We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Listening without interrupting or jumping to solutions. I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody, but instead of problem solving immediately, just listening to what the person is saying, hearing what they are saying, and then reflecting that back to them. Okay, here's what I'm hearing you say. And then asking a simple question. Do you want my help in solving this, or do you want somebody to talk to? I think that's incredibly important from just a leadership perspective, but it's also important in just basic human relationships. Do you want me to solve this problem for you, or are you looking for understanding and someone to talk to? Creating a no stupid questions culture. The minute you start saying, well, that's a dumb question, well, guess what happens? Nobody's going to say anything, right? You've immediately squashed any authentic, genuine approachability as soon as you do that. So opening the floor to anything and everything is on the table. This seems like a kind of a well done, but treating your team like people, not just employees. But again, we're so guilty of this in every organization, is we tend to get on autopilot and think, well, okay, well, everybody's here just to get a paycheck. Well, the fundamental fact is that we spend so much of our work life, so much of our waking life at work. It is an important social arena for us. We do get meaning from our work, from our job, from the people that we interact with. It's not just work. Yes, we get a paycheck in our companies. They're looking for work from us, but it's so much more than that. And so treating people like they are people and not just employees, not just numbers. Being flexible. This is one of the easiest things we can do. We got really good at that after the pandemic or during the pandemic, and then I've noticed organizations are really trying to claw that back with schedules, work from home, remote work. There's this whole return to office mandate. Being flexible. We all have things that come up in our lives, right? Why? And I always go back to, why do we have this business hours, 8 to 5, 9 to 5? Can we get work done outside of that? Can we get work done in a shorter amount of time without having to have mandatory in-office, which, by the way, you probably already aware of the research on this. When you have those 8 to 5s, about 2:33, guess what people start doing? They start playing on the internet and goofing around because they literally just have to be there. Can we be flexible with people in their work situations, particularly when we're dealing with tough life situations? I talked about making time for casual chats when they aren't work related. One of the first things that I always do is just have a basic conversation. Like, let's not dig into work right now. Let's take 2 minutes just to catch up, just so I can understand you a little bit better as a human. And then I can share a little bit about me so we can have that connection point. Encouraging mental health days, not just sick days, making it okay to take a mental health day if you need it, making it okay to say that I need a mental health day, instead of just, well, I'm sick, I need a day to recuperate, and making that a part of your benefits package, your time off package. Giving credit publicly with other people, doing simple acts of recognition. I talked about, sharing sunshine with your team. But then if we do have constructive feedback, giving that privately. There's no point in dragging the rest of the team, dragging everybody into that, because what do you think happens to that person's self-esteem when we start blaming other people in public situations? So give praise and credit widely, publicly, but talk to people privately if there's constructive criticism that you have. And then, I talked about some specific things, but honestly, the most basic thing we can do as leaders, and if anybody that's seen me post on LinkedIn, I use this hashtag a lot now, make compassion the default. What do I mean by that? Well, as humans, we are guilty of engaging in what we call the fundamental attribution error, what psychologists call fundamental attribution error. And it's this idea that when we see other people do something wrong, or for instance, somebody runs into the back of me in traffic in my car, I immediately am going to think, what? Oh, that idiot. How could they run into the back of me? Right. But you don't know the situation. You don't know what went into that. So we engage in this fundamental attribution error when we see people do things or they're not performing at the level that they're expected to, and we say, oh, well, that's a characteristic of that person rather than the situation. We have to start understanding the situation. And how do you understand the situation? Asking, getting to know people, leading with curiosity and empathy. There's a wonderful example from, there's a great book called Talk. I don't have it with me, but Alison Wood Brooks just published it this year. And she talks about, she has this example where she was talking about, she leads this executive professional education program. And she was at the time, she was the only female who was teaching in this program. And she had one of her students, an older gentleman, came up to her before the class and said, basically, is this going to be worth my time to participate in this class? And she was highly offended by that. And she thought, how could you? And she took it as though, I'm the only female, therefore this guy is saying that he doesn't want to take the time to listen to what a female has to say. Well, it turns out after conversations later, she found out that this guy he was dealing with health issues, he was dealing with an illness, and he was just literally exhausted from sitting in all these executive ed sessions. And he was just trying to judge from his perspective, is this going to be useful for me given my health condition, right? And that's such a simple thing that if you think about it, we do that so often, right? We jump to a conclusion, oh, you said that because X, because you are a blank, right? We jump to these conclusions without truly understanding the situation. I use an example in my leadership classes where I talk about just a hypothetical example of, I've got this employee, she showed up late every single day, no call, no excuse, her performance is declining. What do we do? Most of the students will say, oh, well, you got to fire them, right? You got to fire them because they're not performing. What if I told you, for example, what if I told you that person is a single mom who's trying to work to provide for her family, but she's been unable to find childcare for the last 2 weeks, right? Oh, well, we hadn't thought about that. Well, we haven't thought about that because we haven't taken the time to genuinely ask and show compassion and be curious and leading with that empathy. We need to be doing more of that, getting to the root of the problem. And how do we do that? I teach my students this all the time. Lead with curiosity. Don't lead with, oh, okay, here's the answer. Lead with, okay, tell me more. Help me to understand this so we can work together. How can we work together on this? This is a kind of a sticking point for me. Policies are great. We all have company policies. They are all things that we should abide by. But hiding behind policy is not compassion, and it's not leadership. Let me say that again. Hiding behind policy is not compassion, and it's not leadership. If there is a legitimate situation that goes against policy, but it's the right thing to do to help that person, then there are times when we got to get around policy, right? Just because it's policy. And by the way, I being with a background in HR, why do most policies get created? Well, they get created because somebody did something 20 years ago, so they made a policy about it. So now we got to follow it to this day. But when you ask people, why do we have this policy? A lot of people couldn't even tell you, right? Leadership is not hiding behind policy, but it's leading with compassion and understanding and curiosity. And is this the right thing to do given this situation that this employee is encountering? And then again, I go back to the original meme that I showed. Just think back to the leader you wanted when you needed a awesome leader the most, when you were struggling, when you had situations in your life with family and whatever else. What did you want in your leader, right? Why not be that leader for those people that you want to see, right? Why not be the leader that you wanted then when you needed it the most? Think back to the leader that made that difference on you. Some ways to embed this within a culture, within an organizational culture. Number one, and I said this last time, stop promoting toxic people, right? We need to quit putting toxic people in leadership roles. If you are a toxic team member, you are going to be a horrible leader. I can predict that pretty easily. Quit promoting toxic people. But at the same time, making it clear in public commitments that we are dedicated to employee well-being, not just in your mission statements, but in our day-to-day actions. And then why don't we evaluate leaders based upon their contributions to creating a culture of compassion and respect? When we're trying to decide who we're going to promote, why aren't we looking for who's compassionate? Why aren't we looking for who's empathetic? That should be a part of the leadership profile that we're looking for. And then selecting those people based upon that capacity for compassion. And then once we've identified them, we select them, we've promoted them. I could teach a whole semester on this, but we do not develop our leaders enough. We need to give them the tools and resources that they need to do well as leaders. Give them the tools and resources they need to be compassionate leaders, right? And they're going to need a lot of, those of you who are on the call, if you're a leader, you know you need a lot of help. You can't do it all on your own, right? You need social support, you need resources, you need somebody to turn to when you're struggling. Giving new leaders the support that they need to be compassionate to other people is incredibly important. Inevitably, the question always comes up, particularly at a place like UAB and healthcare. Dr. Gorman, sounds great, but what about compassion fatigue? I work in a profession where I have to show compassion all day long, every day. It's exhausting. Yes, 100%, right? And if you're in those fields, thank you for dedicating your life to that. Compassion fatigue is very real. We see it in the research all the time. But one of the things that I will say is, yeah, you have to show compassion as part of your job, but one of the things you're probably not doing is you're not starting by showing yourself compassion, right? When I say compassion and leadership, that includes you. That includes showing yourself compassion, and that it's okay that I don't have all the answers. It's okay that I'm struggling. It's okay that this is hard. Start by showing yourself compassion and then worry about showing others compassion. But we really need to start showing compassion with ourselves in addition to other people. How do we do that? We know there's tons of great research around self-care, self-compassion, in terms of building our resilience, maintaining our physical activity, sleep, mindfulness, reappraising the situation, something called savoring, which is the idea of like remembering those important quality moments, showing gratitude, social connection, physical touch. All of those things are important to building self-care and showing ourselves compassion. And a quick shout out to my friend, Meredith at Guiding Light Leadership, who does this work with her clients in building their resilience toolkit. Is there a future of compassionate leadership? I think so. I think this is the future of leadership. Honestly, I think the people who are going to be able to do this, they should be the next generation of leaders. And I think they will be the next generation of leaders because we know it works. We know it's effective. We know it boosts employee well-being, health. the thing that I don't, and I want to give a shout out, there's lots of different organizations that are interested in this. I want to give a shout out to the Center for Compassionate Leadership. They do put on all kinds of great programming and have lots of resources for how do we become compassionate leaders. But the one thing I want to suggest, though, is that compassion, and I see some things out there where it says make it a part of your strategy. Okay, that's great to make it your strategy, but it's not just a strategy. It's a way of being. You have to lead with that genuine, authentic care for other people. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter all the other things that you're doing. It's not just a strategy. It's a great strategy to use, but be that servant leader that other people need. It's got to be a way of being for it to truly matter. I want to leave you with a couple of quotes, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions, Greg. But quote, I wrote this article at the tail end of the pandemic, and trying to make the point that, if the pandemic taught us nothing else, it's that we are human. We bring our human selves to work every day, and then we take that home with us, and vice versa. We don't check our emotions at the door. We need to be able to harness that. We need to be able to lead with that and appreciate that. And then this comes from Jamil Zaki in his War for Kindness book. This is just a phenomenal quote. We are not merely individuals fighting to empathize in a world of cruelty. We're also communities, families, companies, teams, towns, and nations that can build kindness into our culture, turning it into people's first option. We don't just respond to norms, we create them. I think that is incredibly important, incredibly powerful. Be the change you want to see. If you want to create a compassionate culture, start doing it. We have agency. We can make a change. If we all start doing it, you will see change. And then here's just some future further resources I think may be helpful for the audience if you're interested.
And fantastic information. We had a great chat. I do want to just republish the most recent poll that we did. How confident are you in your ability to lead with compassion? I dropped the results of around the first time, just seeing if anybody's thoughts and thinking with that has changed. So I did go ahead and launch that. We'll get right to the question. So how do you handle it if you are compassionate, but your boss is not very compassionate with you and is unhappy with how you're treating your employees, not getting enough work out of them, and you're just kind of stuck in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, that's a common situation. I mean, my response, and I don't know if this is a good answer, is I don't apologize for being compassionate, right? I'm not going to change my servant leadership philosophy because my boss doesn't like it. I would say make that very clear when you get into that relationship with your boss, is to say, this is the kind of boss that I'm going to be, and I would appreciate your support. I understand that you don't have that approach and philosophy, and I'm okay with that, right? But I would ask for your leniency or your support in allowing me to be the compassionate leader that I need to be for my team, right? And ultimately, and this goes back to toxic workplaces, if you're caught in a situation where you're being asked to do unethical or immoral things, you got to go back to your values. Is that something you're willing to do? And if you're not willing to do it, get out of there, right? Because once you start doing it, then you're treading down a slippery slope, and the rest of it, I mean, you're going to be doing things that you're not comfortable with, and that's not okay.
Is it difficult to show compassion to employees if you are the new boss who replaced the old boss and you just don't know your employees and they don't know you?
Is it difficult? Yeah, but that's not an excuse for trying, right? One of the first things I would do is get to know my team. And when I talked about leading with your values, one of the first things I would do with my team is say, hey, here's who I am. I care about open, honest, transparent communication. I care about empathy, compassion. I'm going to expect that from you. And to do that, here's what I'm going to do. The first 2 weeks, I'm going to have a meeting with every one of you, and I want to understand you a little better, and I want to get to know you. So, yeah, it's hard in the front end, but we can take those steps to build that.
So how do you balance compassionate? Let's hear. How do you balance compassionate is holding others accountable against policy is not leadership?
Well, that's hard. That's not an easy answer. The question is, how much leeway do we have in policy? Because the fairness perspective is a policy applies to everybody, right? But what I've often found is that everybody's a champion of fairness as long as they're not involved in that situation where they need a little bit leniency, right? And so what I would say is, like, policy is great, but we also need to understand we're all humans, and that sometimes policy is not necessarily going to be the best in this situation. And if that's the case, I would make that clear to everybody. Here's the decision that I made, and I'm willing to live with that decision because in my eyes, it's the right thing to do to be compassionate with this particular employee, right? And if people have an issue, I'm more than happy to talk about that perspective.
And the final question, and then we'll wrap things up. How do you break down the facade, the stereotype, the barrier that compassion is often seen by higher ups as weakness?
Oh, I get this all the time, and I hear this all the time. It's seen, and I'll leave with what I talked about earlier. It's seen as a weakness because what are the people at the top? How have they gotten to the top? They've gotten to the top because they've been solely focused on tasks, producing numbers, metrics, which is great. That's fine. But that's not to say that you can't also do the same things, but do it in a compassionate way. The folks in the leadership roles at the top have gotten there from the traditional way that we've always done it, the traditional model of climbing your way up the ladder. My point is, hey, we can do that, but we can also do it in a compassionate, empathic way. My perspective is 100%. It is not a weakness. It's what people need, and it's what we need to be delivering.
Awesome. This has been very fascinating. Great information. It's been a great dialogue, even outside of the formal Q&A. Dr. Gorman, thanks for coming back.
My pleasure, my friend. My pleasure.
You have a good rest of your day. And as a reminder to live attendees, today's webinar was recorded. Once the replay link has been uploaded on our website, we'll send you an email with the details. As for some upcoming webinars that you might be interested in, on April 3rd, we'll welcome a psychiatric mental nurse for the power of goal planning, a step-by-step process to making it happen. On April 10th and 15th, members of the Class School of Business Career Centers will be here for First Impressions Matter, Build the Resume That Wows, and Acing the Interview, essential tips for alumni in today's job market. And on May 20th, Dr. Sophia Bees will be with us for The Science of Sugar, Sweet Secrets Uncovered. Register for these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. We're just 2.5 weeks away from our annual scholarship run presented by Viva Health. Join us in Crestline Village on April 12th as we raise money for scholarships. If you can't make it but still want to make a difference, don't worry. We have a virtual option available. You can register at alumni.uab.edu/run. Finally, how are we doing? Let us know. The QR code on your screen is going to take you to a very short survey where you can share your thoughts. Once again, thanks so much for being with us. And as always, go Blazers.